Hello, everybody. This is Randy Marsden, President of Marsden Advisors. Thank you so much for attending today's presentation. This is MIPS in 2023, an overview of the final rule. If you're having any issues with the presentation today, or if you have any questions on the presentation, utilize the Q&A feature. You can ask any questions to our panel throughout the call, and then we'll also take questions at the end. And there will be a recording sent out later today, along with a recap email. And we will also have this available on YouTube. This slide is just letting you know that this presentation is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute legal, financial, or tax advice. A bit about us, if you're not familiar with Marsden Advisors, we have 50+ years of combined experience with electronic health records consulting. We support over 1,400 clinicians nationwide with MIPS. We have our signature MIPS Success Program, which pretty much takes over all the things you are worrying about with MIPS and takes care of that for our customers. We also do data migrations between EHRs and practice management systems and have done over 100 each year. Our scores right here speak for themselves. These are the latest publicly available overall national scores. And as you can see, Marsden Advisors customers always come out on top. Our agenda for today, we have Jessica Peterson here, who is our VP of Health Policy. She's going to take you through all of the top changes that came out in the final rule across each category. In quality, we're going to focus on some new measures and change measures, specifically in specialties that are most common that are on the call today, including ophthalmology, optometry, dermatology, and plastic surgery. We'll go through all the other remaining categories as well. We'll also go over rulemaking and how you can help influence the direction that this MIPS program goes, and see what we do behind the scenes to help make MIPS easier for everybody. And we'll also go over how we can help, how we can help practices succeed in the MIPS program. And with that, I'll hand it off to Jessica.
All right, thank you, Randy. We're going to start with a quick overview of the Quality Payment Program. So the Quality Payment Program, or QPP for short, was established by the Medicare Access and CHIP Reauthorization Act of 2015, MACRA for short. This was a fantastic law in that it finally ended the Sustainable Growth Rate Formula, or SGR. Some of you may remember that every spring for a while, Congress had to pass these giant doc fixes in order to avoid a 20-30% pay cut under Medicare. And MACRA is what got rid of the doc payment cliff. So there are two, but it also established the rules for the road for what Congress termed value-based care, establishing the QPP. There are two ways to participate in the QPP. One is through advanced alternative payment models, or advanced APMs. These require you to take on financial risk, so they're not very common among specialists. The other is the fee-for-service side of the QPP, which is the Merit-Based Incentive Payment System, or MIPS for short, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So thresholds and payment adjustments, this is really why MIPS matters to you, because it impacts your Part B, Medicare Part B physician reimbursements. So in 2022, the thresholds to avoid a penalty was exactly the same, 75 points, there's no change. But the big change is that in 2023, there is no longer an exceptional performance bonus. It's been retired. And this was actually required by law. The Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 ended the exceptional performance bonus after performance year 2022. So now anything between 75.01 points for your MIPS final score and 100 points will get the budget neutral bonus. That's the orange X% you see on your screen. This is determined on a linear sliding scale, meaning the better you do, the more you get. But as I also mentioned, it's budget neutral. And what that means is that all of the bonus monies for 1 year come from the pool of penalty monies for that year. So the amount that you get is also dependent on how many people are penalized and by how much. So how do we find out what your MIPS final score is? This is actually entirely unchanged from last year. Quality and cost are still 30% of your MIPS final score, followed by promoting interoperability coming in at 25%, improvement activities at 15%, and there is one final score bonus that's available. It's the complex patient bonus, and it's worth up to 10 points depending on the complex patient pool that you see, which is determined by things like hierarchical condition codes and dual eligible Medicare/Medicaid status. One thing that is new in 2023 are MIPS value pathways, MVPs for short. The first year that they'll be available in the program is 2023. Initially, they will be voluntary, but CMS has made it quite clear that they intend for these to replace what's now being called traditional MIPS, the MIPS that we are all used to, with MVPs in the future. And the reason they want to do this is to prepare clinicians to switch to things like advanced APM sometime in the future by aligning the quality and cost measures and improvement activities into condition-based, episode-based, or specialty-based groups. So one of the things that you'll see in MVPs is that there's a smaller pool of quality measures that you can choose from. You only need to report on 4, unlike 6 in regular MIPS. And those quality measures are specifically tailored to the episode or the condition that is being covered by the MVP. So another thing that you'll see in MVPs is promoting interoperability. The EHR category of MIPS is required for all of them, and something called a population health measure. These are things that are determined by things like administrative claims data that you don't have to calculate on your own. Another thing that will be available is that multi-specialty groups can report on specialty-specific subgroups. So it's called subgroup reporting, meaning a subset of the clinicians in your TIN will be able to report as a subgroup. This will initially be voluntary, and then starting in 2026, any group that's determined to be multi-specialty based on claims data will be required to form subgroups. These are the currently available MIPS value pathways. There are 12. None of them are applicable to ophthalmology or dermatology, but if you do have any questions and you find that some of these apply to you because you're not in one of those fields, feel free to shoot us an email because we are familiar with them. So just looking into the future, these were new policies that were also finalized for MVPs, and we kind of already went over them a little bit, but like I said, the quality performance category, you'll have a smaller subset of measures and you can select 4. Just like in regular MIPS, 1 has to be an outcome or high priority measure. Improvement activities, if you're a small practice, you don't really see a change here. If you're a larger practice, you'll find that the improvement activity weight will be doubled. So a medium weighted activity will be worth 20 points, a high weighted worth 40 points, just like it currently is for practices with special status, such as small practices and practices in health professional shortage areas. For the cost performance category, you'll be scored just on cost measures that are included in the MVP model. And then there's the foundational layer, which is like the same for every MVP. And like I said, it will have a population health measure that you have to select at the time of registration, and it will have the entire promoting interoperability category. One thing to note is that the application period for an MVP will be from April to November of the performance year. So if there is an MVP that you saw that could be applicable to you, you don't have to decide right now. You have until November to decide if you want to report on an MVP for 2023. These are some new policies for the subgroup scoring that I mentioned. For the quality category, you'll be scored, the subgroup will be scored on the affiliated groups score for any of the administrative claims measures that they may have selected. If you don't have an administrative claims measure, you'll just be scored on the measures that you report. But if you did select an administrative claims measure and there is no group score available, meaning they didn't treat enough patients to be included in that administrative claims measure, the subgroup will receive a 0 score. For improvement activities, the subgroup will be scored based on what the subgroup reports. For cost, subgroups will be assigned the affiliated group's cost score. If the group does not have a cost score available, it'll just be reweighted. And the same reweighting policies apply to MVPs as apply to MIPS. For the foundational layer and population health measures, subgroups will be assigned the affiliated group score, much like we've discussed already with quality and cost. If there isn't a group score available, that specific measure will be excluded from the subgroup's final score. And promoting interoperability is based on what the subgroup reports. Okay, so now that we've gone over the future of MIPS, what's happening for you now for 2023? Let's start with quality. Some quick quality basics, just to level set. Quality is a full year reporting period, meaning that the whole calendar year of 2023, the data for quality measures during that period is what you report. You can earn up to 60 points within the category. Each measure is worth 10 points, so that's 6 measures. One of which must be an outcome or high priority measure. And quality itself is worth 30% of your MIPS final score. You can report this through claims, EHR, registries, QCDR, etc. Claims is only available for small practices, or you can report using a combination of those. Importantly, there used to be a lot of bonus points in this category. Last year that decreased, so now we're only looking at the 6-point bonus that all small practices of 15 or fewer clinicians receive as long as they report any data in the category. And you can get up to 6 points for category improvement from the prior year, meaning your quality measure scores, some of them went up from the prior year. Quality measure scoring changes. What we're going to be seeing next year is that the 3-point floor is going away for all clinicians that report on benchmarked measures that meet both case minimum and data completeness. For small practices of 15 or fewer clinicians, the 3-point floor will only remain for measures that are either not benchmarked, don't meet data completeness, or don't meet case minimum. All other measures will be scored from 1 to 10 points. For large practices, benchmarked measures will receive 1 to 10 points. Measures without a benchmark, measures that don't meet case minimum, or measures that don't meet data completeness will receive 0 points. So if you are in a large practice, especially, it is very important to make sure that you meet data completeness and case minimum for your measures. To note, data completeness is staying the same at 70% of all denominator eligible patients, and case minimum is staying the same at 20 patients per measure. However, there is a change to data completeness that was finalized for performance years 2024 and 2025. Data completeness will increase for those years from 70% to 75%. CMS has been pushing to increase data completeness for a long time because they're worried about cherry picking or misleading data being submitted by clinicians. They think that 100% should eventually be the data completeness threshold. That's been successfully fought against because of things like switching EHRs, not having the data available because of unforeseen circumstances, etc. So we're hoping that either the rise is slow or it stays at 75%. But currently it is 70%. There were a few MIPS measure changes that were finalized for 2023. There are 9 new measures, including 1 new administrative claims measure. It's about cardiovascular related hospital admissions rates, so it does not apply to most of the people on this call. There are 76 existing measures with substantive changes. That means that it is possible they will lose their benchmark because CMS will not be able to reliably compare the measure to the previous year's performance. And 13 measures will be removed from MIPS. 2 of those measures will be kept for use in MVPs and only for MVPs. And that is measures 110 and 111, which is the flu and pneumococcal immunization measures. To go into more detail on the measure changes that will most impact ophthalmology, optometry, dermatology, and practice and plastic surgery, I'm going to hand it off to our wonderful team of Associate Directors of Client Success, Kate Ruiz and Renee Fryer. Take it away, Kate.
Thanks, Jessica. In ophthalmology, there are 3 important measure changes. Measure 117, diabetes eye exam, will no longer be available through Medicare Part B claims reporting beginning in 2023. Reporting will still be available for the MIPS CQM and eCQM collection types. For MIPS CQM, CMS clarified that the patient age used to determine measure eligibility should be the patient's age on the date of the encounter. On the other hand, for the eCQM collection type, the patient's age for the measure will be the patient's age as of the end of the performance year. For Measure 191, cataracts 20/40 or better visual acuity within 90 days following cataract surgery, CMS finalized a new denominator exclusion for tractional retinal detachment. And for the eCQM collection type, CMS added the denominator exclusion for heteronomous bilateral field defects. This exclusion is already available for the MIPS CQM collection type. Finally, CMS has finalized removal of Measure 265 biopsy follow-up. This has been removed from MIPS because it has reached the end of the topped-out life cycle. I will now hand you off to Renee to go over 2023 measure changes for dermatology and plastic surgery.
Thanks, Kate. There are finalized changes to 3 measures as well as 2 new measures for dermatology and plastic surgery specialties. For Measure 176, TB screening prior to first course of biologic therapy, CMS revised the title to include immune response modifier therapy. CMS also expanded the denominator to include 5 additional biologics as listed above in the added bullet. This was done to align with current therapies. They also clarified that the list of therapies is subject to change year to year as new ones are approved by the FDA. For Measure 265 biopsy follow-up, as Kate mentioned in the ophthalmology measure changes, CMS has finalized removal of this measure. There are also changes to Measure 440 skin cancer biopsy reporting time. There is a new denominator exception for wide local excisions or re-excisions. This exception used to exist as only a denominator note, so this change is expected to have minimal effect. There are 2 new measures beginning in 2023. Psoriasis improvement in patient-reported itch severity was finalized by CMS to address what they see as a gap in care for patients with psoriasis. A similar measure was finalized for dermatitis with the same feedback. The above 2 measures may seem familiar to you since they are currently QCDR measures in the DataDerm registry. Since we report on some general measures for our specialties, we have listed those here. Of note, both the flu and pneumococcal vaccination measures have been removed from traditional MIPS and replaced by a more comprehensive adult immunization status measure. And although Measure 19, diabetes medical attention for nephropathy, has been removed, a new measure, Measure 488, kidney health evaluation, was finalized with the intent to replace and improve upon Measure 119. If you report on some of these measures, check our guide that was sent along with the initial invite to this call. We will also send a copy along with the recording of today's presentation later today. I'll now hand you back over to Jessica to take you through the promoting interoperability category.
Thanks, Renee. So as Renee said, now we're going to go over promoting interoperability. But before we do, there was a question in the Q&A box that I want to answer to make sure that we're all on the same page. And the question was, what is meant by the topped-out life cycle referenced in the finalized measures? So the topped-out life cycle applies to measures that are, as you can imagine, topped out. A measure is considered topped out if its average performance rate is 95% or above. When that happens, the performance is so clustered that CMS has difficulty putting score ranges into 10 different deciles for scoring. So what CMS did is they implemented a, quote, topped out life cycle. If a measure has been topped out for 2 or more years, it's subject to 2 or more consecutive years, it's subject to a 7-point cap, meaning that no matter how well you score, even if you get 100%, you can only get 7 out of 10 points for that measure. if it's topped out for 3 or more consecutive years, CMS will propose it for removal during the rulemaking process. And in this case, many of the proposals were finalized, meaning they were removed from the program because they were no longer considered valuable due to the clustered performance. Okay, so back to promoting interoperability, the EHR category of MIPS. Some quick basics on PI just to level set. It's a 90 consecutive day reporting period minimum, same as last year. What is new is that 2015 edition cures update is now required for your EHR. That means that you can't do a combination of 2015 edition and 2015 edition cures update like you could in 2022. It has to be available for your entire performance period. So you have to have the functionality of the cures update available at the beginning of your 90-day period, meaning the things that the cures update does that the 2015 edition does not do. And by the last day of the performance period that you choose for PI in 2023, your EHR must be officially updated to the cures update. And that's because ONC, the people who certify EHRs, will no longer consider the 2015 editions certified after the last day of this year. So after the last day of 2022, so starting in 2023, only cures update will be considered certified. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to type them in the Q&A box for us to answer at the end or shoot us an email. So within the category, there are 105 available points. 5 of them are from a bonus measure, and you can't get over 100%, so you can earn up to 100 points within the category. You must submit on at least 6 measures, and you have to have a numerator of at least 1, or an attestation if it's an attestation-based measure, or claim an exclusion for each of the measures, or you'll get a 0 for the entire category. And as I said earlier, it's worth 25% of your MIPS final score. So what are the measures for 2023? There were some changes finalized for 2023 PI. One of the big changes is that the query of the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, or PDMP, previously a bonus measure, is now a required measure. So that means that if you prescribe scheduled medications, and I'm going to go over this in more detail in the next slide, you'll have to report this measure. There are some exclusions available. I'll go over them in more detail on the next slide, but I just wanted to make you aware of that right now. And because there is a new measure that's now required, the points have shifted around as well for each of the measures. The patient to provider exchange objective, which has the patient portal measure, is now worth 30 points instead of 40. E-prescribing has stayed the same at 10. Query of PDMP has stayed the same at 10, but now required points, not bonus points. The health information exchange objective is now worth 30 points instead of 20. So if you're sending health information and receiving and reconciling to satisfy that objective, those are both worth 15 points now. And finally, CMS, in order to put additional emphasis on immunization and case reporting, has increased the weight of the number of points available for the public health and clinical data exchange objective from 10 to 15. And they did that because they felt that reporting and being used to reporting to those really failed during the pandemic. So they want to make sure that we're ready for whatever comes next. What hasn't changed is that if you choose to report an additional registry, either a clinical data registry like IRIS or DataDerm, public health registry or syndromic surveillance, you will still get those 5 bonus points. So let's delve in more to the query of the PDMP measure that's now required. Not only has it changed from a bonus measure to a required measure, but the actual requirement of the measure has changed. Previously, it was that for at least one Schedule II opiate medication that you electronically prescribe using your EHR, you use the data from the cert to query the PDMP prior to transmitting the prescription. Now, instead of just being Schedule II opiates, it's also Schedule 3 or 4 drugs, not restricted to opiate drugs. So keep that in mind if you are reporting on this measure. There are now, since it's a required measure, also exclusions for this measure. So the first exclusion is if you're unable to electronically prescribe Schedule II opiates and Schedule III and IV drugs because of state, local, or regional law during the performance period. The second is a low volume exclusion for any MIPS clinician who writes fewer than 100 relevant, meaning Schedule II opiates or Schedule III and IV drugs, fewer than 100 relevant permissible prescriptions during the performance period. And for 2023 only, we have an exclusion for any MIPS eligible clinician who cannot implement a workflow without imposing excessive cost or burden prior to the start of the performance period they select, the 90-day performance period in 2023. I will note that this is an attestation measure, so you just have to do it for at least one, and you can check that box. But there is discussion of making this a numerator denominator, so a performance rate measure like most of the other PI measures in the future. So in addition to adding more points to the Public Health and Clinical Data Exchange objective in 2023, CMS has also finalized changes to the measures themselves. The biggest change is the change to the options that you have to prove active engagement. So in the past, you had 3 options. For option 1, it was just registration with the registry. Option 2 was being in testing and validation. So working with the registry to make sure that the data is mapping correctly, even before you're actively sending data. And option 3 was production. You're actively sending and receiving data, everything's going smoothly. Now, former options 1 and 2 have been condensed into a new option 1 called pre-production and validation. So that encompasses registration and testing and validation. And former option 3 has now been moved to option 2 since there are now only 2 options, and that's validated data production. So it's the same as current option 3. One note I'd like to make is that starting in 2023, CMS is also going to require people to report their level of active engagement. In the past, you just needed to satisfy one of the options. Now you need to satisfy them and also tell CMS where you are. Are you in option 1 or option 2? And then starting in 2024, CMS is limiting the amount of time that you can stay in option 1, which is pre-production and validation, to 1 year per registry measure. The only exclusion to this is if you switch registries for that measure. Say you keep the same TIN, but you're working in a different jurisdiction, so you have to do a new immunization measure that resets a new immunization registry that resets the clock, so you get an additional year to be in pre-production and validation. So keep this in mind as you move forward. And if you are reporting PI, I would really get started on trying to get to option 2, validated data production for e-case reporting and also for immunization if those apply to you as soon as possible, so that you don't run up against that 1-year deadline later on. Finally, the attestation requirements for the PI category are largely unchanged. The biggest change, which I mentioned earlier, is that we're moving from just 2015 edition certified EHR technology to requiring the Cures update. All the other statements are unchanged. So I know PI was quite a doozy. There's always a lot of changes and it's always quite technical, but we're moving on to something a little easier to understand, which is the improvement activities category. Again, starting with some quick basics just to level set. Improvement activities requires a 90 consecutive day reporting minimum, just like PI. Within the category, you can earn up to 40 points. So just pick enough measures to hit 40. There are high priority activities and medium priority activities. Generally, high priority activities are worth 20 points, medium are worth 10. But if you're in a small practice, a rural practice, or a health professional shortage area, they're worth double the points. So a high priority activity would be worth all 40 points, and a medium would be worth half the category score at 20 points. And as I said previously, it's worth 15% of your MIPS final score. So the biggest top changes that we're seeing for improvement activities, especially that will impact our clients in 2023, is the modification of 5 improvement activities and the removal of 6. Specifically, the one that's being removed that's going to be the most impactful is the use of QCDR for feedback reports that incorporate population health. This was used by a lot of people who were EHR integrated with Data, Derm, or Iris, and it was a high-weighted activity. So if they were a small practice, it was the entire score covered right there. That is now being consolidated into a different QCDR activity along with all of the other QCDR activities. And the activity that remains is medium weighted. So if you have been relying on QCDR feedback reports as a high weighted activity for your entire improvement activity score, you can no longer do so. At most, it will be worth half of your score under the new measure it's been consolidated into. So take a look at the improvement activities inventory and see what works for you. In addition, there are 4 new improvement activities, including one high-weighted one called Create and Implement a Language Access Plan. That's just to make sure that people of all languages, or at least the ones that you see most often, can understand their care. And a medium-weighted one called COVID-19 Vaccination for Practice Staff. Since most practice staff are vaccinated, that one should be a pretty easy one to perform. So that's it for improvement activities, and it brings us over to cost. Quick basics, just like quality, it's a full year reporting period, but you don't actually need to report anything actively. CMS calculates your score on the back end using your administrative claims data. The maximum number of points available within the category depends on how many measures you're eligible to be measured under, and it's 10 points per measure. So if you're only eligible for one measure, the whole category is worth 10 points. It's worth 30% of your MIPS final score, and we won't really actually know about your score until the final scores are released because CMS does not release that data in real time. But what was finalized that's very exciting in this rule is the cost category improvement score. So much like quality, where there is an improvement score for the quality category, they're implementing one for cost, and they're implementing it actually starting with the 2022 performance year. So they're doing a retroactive implementation. So this is for up to 1% on top of your cost category score. So if you only have one cost measure, so 1% of 10 points, so on and so forth. And it's for improvement in a measure score from the year prior. We'll go over this in more details in a couple of slides. There have been no changes to any of the episode-based cost measures. And one thing that I really want to remind people is that most specialists remain removed from the total per capita cost measure, but NPs, PAs, and many other mid-levels have been assigned by CMS as primary care, so they will be subject to it. So if you have NPs or PAs in your practice and your group reporting, that is something to be aware of if they are billing under your TIN. So as promised, we're going to go over the cost improvement score in a little bit more detail. So this is meant to reward measure-specific improvement from the prior year. And specifically, it requires, quote, data sufficient to measure improvement to be available. And practically what this means is that you're participating at the same level. So you're either participating as an individual under the same TIN MPI combination, or you're participating as a group. If you participated in the group the year prior, you're participating in a group in the current year under the same TIN. Simple as that. So you basically have to have the same identifier and the same participation level. And the clinician or group, depending on the level of participation, is scored on the same measure or measures as the previous year. Obviously, you can't calculate improvement on the cataract measure if you weren't measured on the cataract measure the previous year. And that's really about it. So I know some of these changes can be frustrating and they can feel really burdensome. And a lot of people feel kind of helpless to impact them, but that is not the case. And that brings us to the rulemaking process. Each year, before CMS decides the final changes to MIPS, they release a proposed rule for the next calendar year. The public, all of the public, has 60 days to comment on that rule, and that can be done on the federalregister.gov website. We also usually publish our comments on our blog so that you can look them over if you want to know what we submitted to help you write up your own. Comments are reviewed by CMS after submission, and any accepted changes are incorporated into the final rule, which is published by November of the year. So if you're unhappy with something that's proposed, definitely make your voice heard in the future, because CMS does listen. They don't always agree, but they do listen. So I highly encourage you to take advantage of this process. Now I'm going to hand you off to Randy to talk about what we do to help you, and then we'll go into the Q&A.
Thanks, Jessica. So, as you learned today, there's a lot of changes next year. The program keeps getting more and more complex. And if you're doing it on your own, we do have solutions to help take on that reporting burden for you. This is just a basic overview of what we do for our clients, but we are a full service MIPS reporting consulting group, which I don't really see too common in the industry. So we set up access into your EHR registry, if you're using one as well, and review all of your setup, make sure you have the best measures selected that are relevant to your specialties. We handle all the coordination between the EHR and registry. We're auditing the actual clinical data to make sure that the data is accurate and that you're getting the best score possible based on your documentation. And we're also just there to support you throughout the year for any questions you have. And then we help process the submission at the end of the year. So if you aren't working with us yet, we do have some free resources available. You can check out valview.app, which is our free scoring tool. It can help you get a quick estimated score of what you're going to be doing if you're not sure already. This webinar and many other webinars are available on our YouTube channel. Jessica recently mentioned that there are some measures that are switching to medium priority that you may not be able to use anymore or don't want to use. We actually just did a webinar last week on patient engagement, patient satisfaction related improvement activities that you can use. So definitely check out that webinar. We also have a handy MIPS calendar that includes important dates throughout the year. We are in the process of printing that right now. If you'd like to receive your complimentary item, you can head on over to that website, enter your mailing address, and we'll send that off to you. If you're interested in our MIPS success services, like I said, we're one of the few ones that take on the full support and do the work for you that we can. For new clients, if you sign up for next year by the end of the month, we have a 20% off plans, and we also have a free 2022 review. So it's almost the end of the year, so there's very little we can actually do to help support your submission. But our advisors would definitely take a look at what you have submitted or plan on submitting, offer suggestions, just make sure there's not any major issues. You'd still be responsible for submitting that yourself, because at this point we're busy processing everybody else, but we'll definitely take a look to make sure that you're not missing anything major that you can resolve on your own before submission. And then we'll get started on next year's reporting once we complete the 2022 submissions. All of this information will be on the email. And if you're interested in learning more about this offer, you can email getstarted@marsdenadvisors.com. We also are launching a self-service training platform called MIPS Made Easy, and that will be launching next year. And you can check your email if you're subscribed for announcements, and that will be available for multiple specialties.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. And before we hit question and answer time, I do want to also plug that if you are part of our MIPS Success family already, any registry measures, QCDR measures that you may use, the updates were just published, so we could not fit them into this webinar. They'll be discussed in your kickoff call and with your account manager once you renew and get the kickoff call in your inbox. All right, let's move on to question and answer. We already have a few in the Q&A box. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand if you want to be unmuted to do it live, or type them in the Q&A box and we'll be happy to answer. I'm going to get started. Both Neil and Lisa asked questions about the SAFER measure. Is it required for 2023? The answer is no. It's actually going to be the exact same as last year. It will be required that you either attest yes or no, but if you attest no, you still get full credit for it. If you attest yes, you get full credit for it. So it's just let them know what you're doing. That being said, cybersecurity hits against the healthcare sector continue to increase. So doing as much as you can to avoid that and protect yourself is important. So I do recommend doing the safer guide. We do have a walkthrough of how to do it available on our blog. If you're interested, you can check that out. I just got another question. Is it recommended that we report more than the required number of improvement activities? And the answer to that is no. These are attestation, and for anything that you attest to, you have to keep documentation for at least 6 years showing that you actually performed it. So you don't need to do more than required to get 40 points. There is no benefit and only risk. Kate, Renee, I think you got some questions in your email inbox before the webinar. Do you want to start reading those out?
Yeah, we got
Sure.
one question. It's on the promoting interoperability category. If we could give some more details on the e-case reporting measure.
Yeah,
Add a little more details. Okay.
absolutely. So this 2022 was the first year that the e-case reporting measure was required, along with immunization registry reporting. So what this requires, step one, is to register with your state's health department's e-clinical registry. I know that's a lot of the word register, but basically what it will require is going onto your state's health department website. I personally just Google the state and then type in e-case reporting afterwards, finding it and seeing if they've declared readiness. It's not always clear for every state. So again, in our blog, we actually went through and looked at every state and to see if they have declared readiness yet this year. So check that out and then follow the steps you need to that are listed on your health department's, your state health department's website to register. Again, the information quality varies, so you might need to reach out to the email for questions on your state health department's website in order to figure that out. It's a little complicated, but they'll let you know if you actually qualify to report for it. So some people don't treat, diagnose, or even have clinical suspicion of the illnesses that are required to be reported through case reporting in their state because those vary state by state. For instance, at least one state, if you even suspect COVID, you are required to do case reporting. In others, you have to treat it or diagnose it to do case reporting. So really look at that list and look at the requirements, if it's suspect, if it is diagnose and treat, before you make your decision that you aren't eligible, because you want to make sure that any exclusion that you are taking is accurate, so that if you get audited, you don't end up getting yourself in a bit of trouble.
And just to piggyback on what Jessica said, the documentation here is really important. So if you go on the website and it clearly states that you're not required to participate, I would definitely print that like to PDF and save that, because if let's say you get audited and you go back to that website and now it says it is available, that can just cause problems. Also, if it's vague on the website, I definitely recommend just emailing whatever contact they have on that page. And then if you get a response back with that information, again, save that. One thing we always recommend, and what we do for our customers, which I think sets us apart, is we pretty much complete submissions expecting to get audited. So we gather proof for improvement activities, for the security risk analysis, safer guide, like anything that's attestation, we like to have in like one big folder on our, on our drive that we share with our customers. That way, that's all just ready there in case of an issue. Same thing goes if you reach out to QPP support. I always recommend emailing instead of calling, because you have that paper trail. And if you have anything that they say that impacts your scoring, you'll want to save that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more. It's better to do it proactive than to go in a panic when or if you get audited. We have another question in the Q&A box. It's asking, does using the IRIS registry to report MIPS meet the PI measure for the bonus points? Or is there another level of engagement with the registry? What documentation is recommended? So if you are EHR integrated with the IRIS registry, yeah, you meet it. It's a clinical data registry. You'll get the 5 bonus points for the category. And as far as what documentation is needed, I believe IRIS sends out every year kind of a notice on whether or not you're registered to report data. But I know that if you get audited and you send them an email, they will send you a letter, an emailed letter, like a PDF letter, stating that you did report data.
Okay, great. Jessica, we have another question too for promoting interoperability. So what is your recommendation if practice hasn't received any summary of care CCDA documents from their referring providers?
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. So we get this problem a lot, where we have practices that are trying to be proactive and reaching out to people that refer to them and just not able to get an electronic summary of care document sent from the referring provider's EHR to theirs. So what I generally recommend is step 1, do you know any practices that are on your same EHR vendor? If you do, it could be that they're just confused about how to send it. And if you know how to send it because you have experience on yours and they refer a patient to you, you can just go ahead and call them and be like, hey, this is what you need to do. And please just send it to me. And as long as you get that one during your PI performance period and do a clinical information reconciliation on it, you're golden. The other step I would recommend, if that doesn't work for you, is check to see if there are any large primary care practices or hospital-based practices that refer to you, because the likelihood is that they're going to have the technical capability and knowledge to be able to do this. So those are the 2 kinds of practices I would prioritize for trying to get this. And if that fails and you are able to get more than one direct mail address for your practice, so one for like each clinician, and direct mail is basically the email address for your EHR directly to you in your EHR.
And Jessica, something that comes up sometimes, because a lot of practices are referred from other doctors maybe that don't have an EHR yet. Are there alternatives to it being via direct mail, but still electronic?
There are alternatives, but if the other provider doesn't have EHR, they can't make that summary of care electronically. So there are no additional alternatives. eFax, for instance, does not count. It has to be generated using an EHR and sent to your EHR. You could be part of a health information exchange, but those cost money. So really the easiest and cheapest way is to use the direct mail addresses in your EHR. And if the multiple clinicians in your practice have those direct mail addresses and you are able to do internal referrals, which is not uncommon. Let's say you work with an optometrist and you're referring your patient to the optometrist after they've seen you because they just need to get some standard vision care and a refraction. You can send that referral through the direct mail and have them do a clinical information reconciliation on it, or vice versa. That's totally allowed and it would count toward the measure.
You can also check to see if your practice that you work with have a direct mail, because you might end up calling the front desk and maybe they don't know what a direct address is. But if you go to the NPI registry site, you can search by doctor's name and you'll see a section called endpoints. And granted, this would involve somebody at the practice going into PECOS and updating the endpoint. But if they have it there, then that means they have the direct mail message activated. And also, if you have direct mail set up and you haven't put your endpoints into NPI registry yet, definitely do that. We have a blog article on our site, and that might help increase the adoption if other practices are looking to refer people to you and they see your address in there and can easily send that without calling and asking.
Yeah, and quick note on adding your direct mail or electronic endpoint to the NPI database is that it takes about 2 minutes if you follow the instructions on our blogs. 2 minutes per provider. It's pretty quick and easy. All right, so we have another question in the Q&A box. It's a follow-up question on what we just answered. And does that work for internal referrals when using the same EHR database and submitting as a group? It will work for internal referrals if you are sending it to a different direct address. So if you have a clinician in your group, even if you're submitting as a group, and you send them an electronic summary of care to their direct mail address from yours within your EHR, that should count. And if you're having issues with that, that is also something that our full service MIPS consulting helps with. We work with EHRs to make sure that measurement is being done appropriately. We've definitely encountered issues with that in the past. All right, we have about 7 minutes left. So if there are any more questions, let us know. Happy to answer.
While we're waiting, just
Jessica,
to piggyback on what Jessica said, so in to answer, like follow up on that answer as well, just make sure you're doing that consistently. So if you're going to do an internal referral, this method, make sure it's just not like a one-off. It's actually something that you would be doing during the reporting period. And if where we're getting these clarifications, there's a great resource on the QPP site. In the resource library, you can actually download the measure specification documents. Each measure has one, and at the end they have I think it's called additional information section with just a bunch of bullets, and it's pretty much all the frequently asked questions that people have asked over the years and clarifications to that.
Yeah. In addition, we do also have a close relationship with CMS because we report for so many people that we're able to ask direct questions and get answers. Obviously, within what's legal, they're not allowed to give us any tips about what's coming next that they don't give publicly, but for clarifications. All right, we have another question in the Q&A box. It's about the cost category. The question is, with cost now 30% of the MIPS score, do you have any advice on how to know a provider will get at least 75 MIPS points to avoid a penalty? Great question. What I usually recommend is that if you're eligible, if you think you're going to be eligible for a cost measure, assume that you're going to get 50% on that, so 15 points, and plan accordingly. Unfortunately, that means you got to do real well on the other categories. But another thing that I would recommend is to take a very close look at the exclusions for each measure. Every cost measure has exclusions to make sure that complicated cases don't get put into the measure. So if you take a look at that, make sure that you have documented the ICD-10 condition codes prior to whatever trigger it is. Like for cataract, it's 99682, 99684. So you have a 120-day look back period before that CMS looks at to see if that ICD-10, a complicating ICD-10, was coded on a claim during the 120 days prior to the procedure. So just make sure that you're documenting complicating conditions to make sure that your riskier cases, the ones that are more likely to cost more money, aren't being inappropriately included in your cost measure score.
Also, you can check the QPP site. Like, granted, the cost score obviously was not scored last year, but if you were picked up in measures, you'll actually be able to see that measure in detail. You won't see an actual score out of like 0 to 10 for each measure, but you can actually download the beneficiary level data, which shows you all the data that would have been used to calculate that. So you can take a look and see if there's any issues you identify. We've already done that for some of our customers as we're ramping up to be able to fully support this category, and they've noticed billing issues like right from looking at that. So I would check that. And then if you go into prior years when they actually did do the score, if you were picked up in any of those measures, you can obviously see what you were scored on for those measures and basically adjust that to 30%. Obviously, it could be completely different based on each year, but the structure of these episode-based cost measures haven't changed significantly year to year. But granted, a lot's changed over the years, especially since COVID. So the scores might be different, but that's another strategy to look at.
Yeah, excellent addition. Thank you, Randy. We have about 2
Jessica,
minutes
we
left.
actually,
Okay.
we do have another cost category question that came in. So they said, we've not been measured on it yet. What can we do to optimize our score?
Yeah, great question. So the answer, unfortunately, stays the same because there haven't really been any years that people have gotten measured on it because COVID keeps getting in the way. So make sure that you code the exclusions appropriately. Any complicated conditions that would cause your case to potentially be more expensive, make sure that those are coded in a pre-op visit or a visit in the look back window prior to the trigger code. So again, for cataract, it would be 66984 sometime in the 120 days preceding that. Make sure you have any complicating ocular conditions coded for so that those cases are not inappropriately included in the measure.
Yeah, another thing specifically to cataract cost measure, because that's what I've been working on a lot lately. Definitely take a look at the measure specification comes with like a spreadsheet, like an Excel sheet with everything that they're looking for. And there's some CPT codes that get picked up no matter what. There's others that look at the diagnosis, and particularly during pre-op, the first or second diagnosis, and then in post-op, the first diagnosis. So if you're in a multi-specialty group and the patient's being seen for something besides, let's say, the cataract surgery, if sometimes EHRs automatically just load in the entire problem list into the exam, and maybe you're not doing that. Maybe they're just coming in, for a cornea reason or a retina problem. You want to make sure the coding isn't inadvertently picking up extra exams that are unrelated to the cataract surgery.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Excellent point, Randy. All right, so we have less than a minute left. Final call for last minute questions.
We have one more about cost. So why does cost only look at Medicare claims, but the other MIPS categories aren't just Medicare patients?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So the answer is that is what CMS has access to. They don't know the cost that you're getting through insurance companies or anything like that. And to be perfectly honest, it's what Medicare cares about, because the whole point of value-based care is to reduce costs and improve quality. And Medicare has that fixed budget, so that is what they're looking at, but it's also just the data they have access to. If you aren't working with us, obviously we recommend that you do. If you still want to do it on your own, check out the MIPS Made Easy. That's going to come out probably in February next year. We have one last question and we're a little over, so then we'll have to go. This person would like to ask their question live. So Tamika, I'm going to open your mic.
I'm so sorry. I was just wanting to get a copy of this because I showed up an hour late on the wrong time zone.
No worries. We'll post the webinar to our YouTube account and send out that link.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right. And with that, we're a little bit over. Sorry for keeping you a bit late, but I hope you enjoyed the rest of your Friday and happy holidays. You'll get a copy of any guides that we talked about and a link to the presentation on YouTube in the follow-up email, either later today or early next week. Have a great day.